Are you thinking about immigrating to Canada? Whether you are outside the country or inside the country right now, all of the information in this video will help you. So, in this video, today we will discuss the main paths to Canadian immigration, express entry, wait times, the best practices when you are filling in your application, when to ask for help with your immigration application, how to recognize and avoid scams when it comes to immigration, and the biggest mistakes that people make that could lead to your application being refused. Now, you might be wondering who this person is beside me, and who I am as well, maybe. So I'm Alex. And with me today, I have a special guest. This is Jen. And Jen, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you do? How long have you been doing it? And why are you qualified to help us answer these questions today?
Thank you, Alex. So I am a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. So immigration law is a regulated profession in Canada. So I act as a legal representative in helping people that need assistance with their applications, or act as counsel if they need assistance in front of the Immigration Refugee Board, which is kind of like a small court, a tribunal for immigrants.
Okay. And how long have you been doing this job?
I've been working with international students and immigration as a whole for about 10 years, and I've been certified as a regulated Canadian immigration consultant just over 5 years.
Okay. And what kinds of cases do you deal with? Because we have people who will be in different political situations, personal situations, and if they're thinking about immigrating to Canada, if they want to get help from you or someone like you, what kinds of cases do you deal with?
So I assist with all types of applications. Some people just want help with their application. Some people have more complex situations. So it could be with visitor visa to visit Canada, for study permit for international students, work permits if you want to work here in Canada, but also more permanently like family sponsorships or refugees.
Okay, so everything across the board. And based on my research and our conversations, I believe currently there are around like 15 different paths or streams that you can use to become a resident in Canada. And those different streams can be separated into two main paths. So Jen, why don't you tell us what are the two main paths to immigrating to Canada?
So I would separate them into temporary residency. So if you just want to visit Canada temporarily, for example, if you came as a visitor, you might come here for a maximum of 6 months. An international student, you might only come for the period of your studies. And the other category would be permanent residency. So if you want to stay here for a long time, long term in Canada, this might be through a family sponsorship. So a family member or spouse might sponsor you to come here and you get permanent residency. This might also come through a refugee path. So two main paths, temporary residency and permanent residency.
Okay, so to clarify, if I want to become a permanent resident and I'm currently a temporary resident. So imagine I am a student, I have come to Canada to university, or I am a worker, my company has sent me to Canada. Is it easier for me to become a permanent resident once I am already in the country as a temporary resident?
It might be. It depends what path you use to get permanent residency. But let's say you are an international student. You can, let's say you did a postgraduate program. So a program that's 2 years at a Canadian college or university. When you graduate from that Canadian college or university, you can then apply for a work permit for those same 2 years, the same length, which is called a post-graduation work permit. And then the pathway to permanent residency there is as soon as you have 1 year of Canadian work experience, you can be eligible to apply for permanent residency.
Okay. So the process you are describing, that sounds like it would take how long about?
Yeah, so it is, I would say it is a longer process.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen that quickly. So let's say you studied for 2 years, you work for 1 year, and then it may take another year for permanent residency.
For the processing of the application
Yes.
and reviewing your documents and all of these
So
things.
in that specific scenario, maybe 4 to 5 years it might take you.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah.
So we'll get more into that when we discuss wait times, but this is like an excellent example of how long it could take in a certain scenario. So you've mentioned temporary path, the permanent residency path. And you have different options, whether it's studying, coming as a worker, coming as a visitor, coming as a refugee, coming through a family relationship, or being married to someone within the country. What is the most popular immigration path if I want to immigrate to Canada?
Well, if it's temporary residency, a lot of people from outside of the country come to Canada to study or work. There are many questions of how can I work in Canada? So it's very popular, but it's also one of the harder permits to get. If you are talking about permanent residency, I would say family sponsorship is quite popular as well.
Okay. So I want to go back to what you mentioned about the work permit, and everybody wants a work permit. They said, I want to, do my job, but I want to do it in Canada. I want to go to Canada. I'm going to go through the work permit path. Why is the work permit path in some ways the most difficult path, or one of the most difficult paths to enter the country and gain temporary residency or permanent residency?
Yeah. So first I'll talk about an easier work permit to get. So an easier work permit to get is what's called a spousal open work permit.
Spousal open work permit. These are new words for me too. Okay.
So this means that your spouse, so the person you're married to, is already in Canada. So they are working in Canada, or they are an international student. Most recently, there have been some new regulations for international students and their spouse, so just be careful with that.
Yeah.
But if your spouse or partner is already in Canada, you are eligible to apply for an open work permit, spousal open work permit.
Okay. And
While
that
they
one
are
is not
here.
bad. Like it's not easy to get, but it's easier to get.
Yes.
Okay.
If you are outside of Canada and wanting to come to Canada to work, that's much more difficult.
Okay.
So I'll explain why.
Yes, please, why?
So if you are outside of Canada, the first thing you need is a valid job offer from a Canadian employer.
So you need to have a job offer from a Canadian company. Okay.
The employer now must apply for what is called a labor market impact assessment. We can say it short as LMIA.
Okay. Labor market impact assessments. Okay, I think I know what it means, but could you describe it a little bit?
So what this means is the employer has to prove that there is no other permanent resident or Canadian citizen here in Canada that can do that same job.
Okay.
So you can see how that can be difficult to get and to prove. If the employer gets this positive LMIA, then with that, you can apply for your work permit.
Okay.
Yes, so there's a longer process and it's much more difficult. And I will add that I have a lot of people coming to me saying, oh, this agency or this company has promised me LMIA and a valid job offer. So and this happens all the time. So I just want to put it out there that you have to be cautious, be careful with this, because no one can guarantee you a work permit. And if they do, you should be a little cautious, especially if they're asking.
Skeptical, perhaps. Yeah.
Yes, especially if they're asking for a lot of money. We say in English, if it's too good to be true, then, right?
It's probably not true.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And that path sounds difficult because you also have to find an employer who is willing to take the extra step to complete more documents on your behalf. And they are just meeting you for the first time through a resume or through a video conference meeting or something.
Mm-hmm.
And, if your skills are highly specialized and highly sought after, this means a lot of people want your skills, then maybe it's easier. It does happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you do see people entering Canada through this path, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. But it's still more difficult because
it's more difficult
extra steps
than most people think. Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, even the people watching this and myself and you, of course, you would know this. I think I know the answer, but you can clarify. Mm-hmm. Is the immigration process the same for every country outside of Canada?
Mm-hmm. So it isn't. There is a general checklist for each type of visa or permit that you're applying for. However, it also depends on the political situation. So what's happening in the country, the economic situation that's happening in the country. So me as a representative, I'm aware of these things and I'm able to guide clients in terms of what extra additional documents you need. So it's not the same. Also, depending on your own personal situation, you might need to prove some more items in your application.
Okay, so if I am, if my country is in a period of war, for example, that would automatically change the potential processes that are available to me.
Mm-hmm. In getting documents, maybe, proving additional extra things, as well as processing times might be longer of how long it takes for your application to go through.
Okay. So, Jen, you mentioned the general checklist that visa offices are going through, whether they are looking at someone who wants to become a temporary resident as a worker or student or a permanent resident. What is on that general checklist? Can you give us like 2 to 4 different things that are on that checklist?
Yeah, so it will depend what you're applying for, but the most common items you'll see on the checklist are things like proof of funds. So you want to make sure you have enough money to come to Canada and to support yourself while you are here in Canada.
How much money do I need then?
Yeah.
Sorry for cutting you off, but how much money?
Yeah, so if you're staying a short period as a visitor visa, maybe a couple months, maybe you only need a few thousand Canadian dollars. It may help if you are staying with a family member or friend. They can help you in supporting this.
Okay.
But if you are coming, let's say, as an international student, now the minimum requirement has just been raised. So you might be looking at around $20,000 per year to show that you can support yourself, pay for everything you need to while you are here as a student. So money, you need to make sure you have your official documents ready. So passport, birth certificate. If you're a student, you may need your official transcripts, your degrees, and all of these official documents. You need to make sure they're translated in English or French and by a certified translator as well.
Okay, so that's a very important detail, I think. Any documents that you that you have to show, especially if you're a student, you're going to get diplomas or notes from the university. You need it translated. It has to be in English. It can't be in another language.
Yes.
Okay.
And then again, depending if, let's say you're coming as a student, English is very important. So you need to show there might be a cutoff of level of your English that you need to achieve. And you prove this through one of the recognized exams like IELTS or CELPIP.
Okay. And do you recommend IELTS or CELPIP if a person is specifically coming to Canada? I think people are familiar with IELTS who are watching this video. CELPIP might be new to some of your ears. That one is more specific just to Canada, right?
Yes, so you could do either one. Some have found CELPIP a little easier, but IELTS might be easier to find a test center in your country. So either one you could use.
Yeah, I think there are definitely more resources for IELTS online for now. But you mentioned CELPIP. Some people have told you it might be a little bit easier based on what you have heard from people going through the process.
Yes.
Okay. And this, proof of your English, this isn't mandatory for every category.
Not for
right?
every category.
Okay.
No.
So what are some categories where your level of English it's not important? Like, I'm assuming if you're a visitor, for example, you don't
Visitor
need
visa
to
may
prove
not,
your English.
Right. Yes. Refugee might not be important, but things like permanent resident, if you're coming as a skilled professional and you're going through the express entry path that we'll speak about, English is very important and it gives you more points the better your English is. So that's very important.
Okay.
And coming here as a student is also important.
Okay. So far, I've heard money, like you need to prove how much money you're making. And the amount will depend on whether you're coming alone, whether you're coming as a student, a worker, temporary, visitor. You might need to prove your level of English depending on which path you're going through. And can you tell us like maybe one more thing that's on that general checklist? So money, English level, what else?
Let's say you're coming as a visitor, you might need an employment letter to show that your employer's you're almost confirming your employment in your country, which kind of ties in with your ties to your country and that you'll return after.
Okay, all right, so let's go back there so you said ties to your country. So if you are coming as a visitor, you need to prove to the visa office that you will return to your country.
Yes.
Okay, and one of the ways you can show that you will return to your country is by having a letter of employment from your employer in your country. Okay, what are some other ways that people can show their ties to their country that, hey, I'm just here to visit, I'm just here temporarily, I'm just going to work for a little bit and then I'm going to go back. What are some other things or documents that might be requested?
Yeah, so employment is good if you own any assets, which are things like property or house, or if you have a second property as an investment property. These are all certain items you can use to show your ties. Also, if you are traveling alone and your family is staying in your home country, that might be another way to show your ties. So you might have a wife or husband at home and children at home that you need to return to afterwards.
Okay, perfect. So again, I don't want to go through everything. I think that's substantial for now. So you mentioned express entry. So number one, what is express entry? And number two, what is the process or maybe different processes that you can go through to gain express entry? So two-part question. What is it? How do I do it?
Yeah, so the name is express entry. It's not so express.
It's just the name.
It's not like you will get permanent residency in 2 months.
But I want to get residency in 2 months. Come on.
Yes, everyone does, right? But express entry is a point system that leads to permanent residency. there are many different streams within permanent residency that you may be eligible for. But as a candidate, what you would first do is create a profile for yourself. In your profile, they will evaluate certain things like your level of English, your work experience. So if you have work experience outside of Canada, you get points for this. If you have work experience inside of Canada, you get more points for this. Education as well. So if you have a bachelor's degree, you get points. If you have higher education, like a master's or PhD, you get even more points. If you studied at a Canadian college or university, you get more points for this. Okay. So it's a full point system. At the end, it will tell you what program you're eligible for and your score.
So how is this different from like just the paths we have discussed? Because isn't every application an express entry application in this case? Like how are aren't my points always being evaluated?
They are, yes. But this is a certain, once your points are calculated, you are a candidate that is put into a pool of candidates.
Okay.
And so you can stay in that pool for up to 1 year. And during that year, there are draws. So the federal government, IRCC, does draws every other week, sometimes more often. And they choose, sometimes they choose no program at all. Sometimes they choose a specific program. For example, people who have studied at a Canadian college or university. And there's a cutoff. So let's say my final score was 450 and the cutoff was 460. Would I make it, Alex?
The cutoff was 460. I only have 450. Wait, my points are 450. I'm not good at math, but I'm going to say that's not good enough, Jen.
So you didn't make it that round.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's...
And just going back, you said there is a draw. When I think of a draw, I think of a person putting their hand in a hat and picking out a name saying, hey, this person is the lucky winner of residency in Canada, for example. Is that literally how they do it?
Well, they'll choose a number.
Hat,
they'll choose, we don't really know what goes on behind the scenes of immigration, but they choose a number that's cut off. We don't know how these numbers are really chosen. Yeah. But they have different quotas, which is how many people they want to offer permanent residency per year. So it might be involved in that. And so then if you meet the cutoff, so maybe the next round you will make it, then you will get an invitation to apply for permanent residency. Okay. And then you do your full application to permanent residency.
So just so I'm clear, is express entry only for permanent residency?
Yes, it leads to permanent residency.
Okay, so as a temporary resident, there's no like express entry?
No, it's just, it only leads to permanent residency.
Okay. So if I go to the official site where I complete my application, is there a specific link that says express entry? Or am I automatically put into a pool of, hey, this person's application looks really good. Let's put them in the express entry pile. Like, how does that work?
No, you have to officially apply for express entry on your own. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So you have to be very confident. Hey, my English level is great. My job is really good. I can prove my funds. I'm very solid. I want to bring my family. And I think I have enough points to like immigrate to Canada. Yes. I'm going to try the express entry path.
Yes. And there is what's called, so your score is called a CRS score. And there is a CRS tool that you can kind of play around with and see if you would be close enough to be eligible.
And so, CRS, is that Canadian Residency Stream?
It's comprehensive ranking score.
Okay. Yes. I wasn't close. Okay, comprehensive ranking score. Yes. So like your overall total score.
Yes.
Okay. So let's move on. Thank you, Jen. That was very informative. Wait times. So this is one of the biggest questions that people have when I complete my application, everything is ready. I'm like, I'm done. This is perfect. I know I'm going to get into Canada. They have all my documents, my marriage certificates, my diplomas, etc. And I'm sitting at home, I'm twiddling my thumbs. How long can I expect to wait to hear a response from the visa office in this case?
Yes, that's what everyone wants to know,
Yeah.
right? So it depends on a few things. It depends if you're applying within Canada, if you are in Canada, or applying outside of Canada. It also depends what application you're applying under. So for example, and there is a website, we can put the link in the description as well. You can check IRCC processing times, and these actually change weekly. So maybe when you applied, the wait time has gone up or down a few months after if you're still waiting.
Can you check your own personal wait time, or is it based on like the country?
Yes, so you can choose within Canada. If you choose outside of Canada, then you will choose your specific country. So it's just a general processing time for that type of application. So for example, current application times, visitor visa in Canada. So most likely you already have a visitor visa if you're in Canada, but you might need to extend it, ask for a longer time. So
while you're waiting for the processing time.
Yeah, while you're in Canada. Let's say you want to stay longer.
Yeah.
So a visitor visa in Canada is only 16 days right now. So you get approval, hopefully not refusal, approval in 16 days. That's probably the fastest in any type of category. However, if I am applying for a visitor visa outside of Canada, and let's say I choose France, right now the processing time is 297 days.
297 days.
So almost a full year. Now this can go up and down. So it could be less, but it could be more as well.
So can you, I don't know, I'm assuming you've looked at this site fairly often. So can you give us a range? Like it could be as fast as this, or it could be as long as this. Can you give us a range?
Visitor visas are a little maybe more unpredictable outside of Canada. But let's say a family sponsorship, normally I range this between 6 months to, I think current processing times are 9 months. But it also depends if you don't have all your documents ready, it's possible they just refuse it right away, or they follow up with you. They send you an email saying, I need this document from you. So that might take more time. So let's say a family sponsorship, normally I say it's between 6 months to a year.
Okay, 6 months to a year for family sponsorship. Okay. And it could be longer than a year in some cases
longer,
as well. And I guess that depends on like just the pile of applications sitting on the desks of people in visa offices.
Yeah, so whatever processing times you see on the IRCC website, that normally takes into account how busy they are. But it could be longer just specifically for your case if you didn't include all of the documents required. So that's why I always say you must be very organized and make sure you have everything there so the process is very smooth and there's no delays.
So you can, and this is moving on to the next point on the list, you can increase your chances of having faster processing times if you do what, basically. So what are, I'm going to read from my card here. What should people be ready for when applying for immigration? Like, what are the best practices when you are preparing your application? We've talked a lot about when you're preparing your documents, you have everything translated, etc. What are some of the best practices that people can do in order to increase their chances of an approval?
So first of all, you want to make sure you're eligible for the path that you're applying for. So if you're coming as a student, if you're coming as a visitor, are you eligible? And you can find that on the IRCC website, which we've put in the description, but you can check if you meet all of those requirements. Then it'll be important that you look at that checklist and you get all your documents ready. I would probably not advise. I have a lot of people coming to me saying, well, I got advice from this blog online or this group online. What I would say to that is every person's situation is different. And well, they're not officially giving legal advice, so you want to be a little careful there. A lot of people will also say, well, my cousin did it this way, or my uncle told me to do this. Again, every person's situation is different, so you want to look at your situation. Your uncle might have more money than you, or might have other assets that you don't have, or vice versa. So you want to be careful about that.
So make sure you're eligible. Don't just like listen to hearsay from other people. Hearsay is just things you've heard. Go to the official sources of the information. So the websites that we have in the description to this video are the official Canadian government websites, which have the most up-to-date information. Okay.
Yeah, and I will be honest, and I think it's known that government websites aren't always the easiest to navigate. So sometimes it can be very confusing, or your specific answer is not answered on the website. So if you think you have a complicated case, or you just want more help, you can look at getting legal advice. But again, you want to be careful with this, that maybe someone else has used the same legal help. And so you feel comfortable using that person. We can put the link below as well. If you are using a regulated Canadian immigration like myself, you can check if they are certified. But even certified RCICs may, they may not have the best practices. So overall, you want to make sure you're working with someone that you can trust. And if anyone says they're guaranteeing you something, again, it's probably not. So only a visa officer can approve an application. So, and most likely you're not speaking with a visa officer.
No. So if someone says, hey, listen, I can get you approved to Canada in 2 months, okay? They're not the ones who make the decision.
No.
Right? Like they can maybe help you push the application to the visa office, but they can't speak on behalf of the visa office.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Okay.
Yes. So even me, I can never give a guarantee. I would say we're good at what we do, but we can't say, yes, 100% you will receive a approval.
Yeah,
So
your work is dependent on other people.
Yes, yes.
So I think that makes total sense. Okay, so yeah, you need to make sure you're eligible, make sure your documents are in a good order. And we'll talk about that more a little later about documents not being in a good order. How about, because this sounds like a complex process, right? Like, how about mentally? Like, what should people expect? How can you avoid becoming frustrated or discouraged because, you have been asked, sorry, you have to complete this application again, or sorry, this information is missing, or maybe they're just frustrated because they're waiting, right? And maybe they're in a political situation that they want to get out of, and they're just waiting. Like, what mentally, what advice would you give to someone in those types of situations?
Well, I would say immigrating to any country is a big decision.
Yeah, this isn't just to Canada.
Right. You might be, again, if it's permanent, it might be a little more serious. You might be leaving your whole family. So taking those things into consideration, but I would say that immigration is an investment. So you do need money, and it's important to figure out how much money you need. And it is a waiting game, so to speak. So again, checking those processing times, but if your documents aren't in line, it could take longer as well. So I think mentally you need to be prepared that it is an investment and it may take time depending on, what country you're from, what stream of immigration you're applying under.
So just patience is a virtue in this case, and you need to be willing to and expect to wait in some cases. We've talked about processing times of 6 months, 9 months, more than a year. So you should be ready for these things and not expect to have an approval within 2 weeks. It's like, oh, well, I submitted my application. It's just like when you order something from online, 2 to 3 weeks, it's going to come from the Atlantic Ocean, across the Atlantic or something, or the Pacific.
Yeah. And not comparing your application to
Yes.
someone else, because someone will come to me and say, well, my friend's application was approved in 4 weeks, but yours is now at 3 months. So again, every application is different, so you don't want to compare. And if you do receive a refusal, I would say to not get discouraged. That might be another conversation we can have, but it doesn't mean it stops there. You can reapply depending on the reasons for refusal.
Yeah, to give a personal example, when my parents immigrated to Canada in the 80s, it took multiple years for us to get our visa approved. We were in a political situation in Poland at the time, and it took us multiple years before the visa application was finally approved. So just keep going. Basically, don't get discouraged, be patient, and thank you, Mom and Dad, for doing that for us and continuing to apply. Okay, so Jen, you mentioned that, you shouldn't just trust blogs or, hey, my uncle said this and all these types of things. So moving on to help and scams, I'm going to address the scams part first. What are some signs, and you've mentioned some already, and maybe you'll repeat them here, that, hey, this might not be legitimate, or this might not be the most trustworthy way to immigrate to Canada?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, if anyone is promising you something or guaranteeing, it's probably not true and probably some type of scam, because like I said, the only person that can approve your visa is the visa officer.
Okay.
And normally there aren't people from the outside, don't have these connections. Even people working in this field for 40 years don't have those connections. So that
what if they say hey, my friend Frank, he works at the visa office. I have a tight connection with Frank, and we can get your visa approved super fast.
Again, I would be quite skeptical of this.
Okay.
And it's not a guarantee that Frank gets your application. So when your application is submitted, there are many visa officers that it goes to. So this is most likely not true if they say this to you.
Okay. Yeah. And this is going back to the best practices about, actually, the best practices of asking for help. This is something a little new. So when do I know that I can't do this by myself? I can't just, this government website is very confusing. There are so many links. There are so many paths. There are so many documents. I have to get this translated. What? And you feel overwhelmed. And maybe this is a good time to ask for help. But so maybe I answered your question for you, but when is it a good time to ask for help from someone who knows what they're doing? And how can you make sure that that person actually knows what they are doing?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the person. Some people look at the checklist and they say, I don't want to do this on my own. It's too confusing. And they look for help right away just because they don't want to do it themselves. Some people have a more complex case. Like if you have received a refusal in the past, you most likely want legal help because there's a few more steps that will go into your application, making sure that the reasons for refusal before are no longer there. So if you've had a refusal or your case is complex, you probably want to seek legal help, but you may also just want to do it if it's your first time and it's very complicated or overwhelming.
Okay.
So you can seek legal advice. You might look for a regulated Canadian immigration consultant in your country, but it could also be in Canada. So I have clients all around the world and they are not in Canada, or an immigration lawyer. I talked about referrals. It's good to work with someone that you know someone else has already worked with and had a good experience.
Like a doctor or a dentist?
Yeah, right. It's like when you're choosing a doctor or a dentist for the first time, you're not going to go with anyone because similar to a dentist working on your teeth, and that's pretty important, could be, your life that's on the line almost. So you want to work with someone who is referred or that you believe you can trust. So you might want to research. I think it's very important to do your own research. Does this person have a website? But is the website legitimate?
What if it has a maple leaf? My website has a maple leaf. I'm going to help you move to Canada.
Yes, that doesn't mean much.
The maple leaf is not a sign of quality?
Okay. So you might want to see if this person is on other platforms online. Okay. You need to do your own research to see if you trust this person. Agencies outside of Canada can be difficult to trust. They have a lot of people working there, but they're not all certified or lawyers. And so they may be taking your money, but not really providing or performing the services that you're looking for. So we don't want that to happen to you. We want you to if you need legal help, you want to get the right help. Yeah. Another thing is that, it might cost you money, so you have to consider that. But some legal representatives will meet with you for let's say 1 hour consultation. And maybe they can answer some of your questions that you had doubts with. Okay. So you're not fully committing to
working with them
and spending money, but you can maybe get some of your questions answered, and then you can decide at that point if you want to work with them.
Yeah. And going back to the scams a little bit, there are immigration consultants who are not really immigration consultants. And before the video, you mentioned about ghosting, like people turn into ghosts. Can you just, maybe people already know what we're talking about, but just take a few seconds to mention that.
So ghost consultants or ghost lawyers. So this exists in Canada and outside Canada. So I will have clients that come to me saying they spent all this money, gave this money to a lawyer or a consultant.
Thousands of dollars.
Thousands of Canadian dollars. Yeah. And now they're gone. And they don't know if their application has been submitted, started. So you want to avoid this. Again, doing your research, seeing if this person really exists besides their website or just a name or an advertisement that you saw. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. And going to the final section of our video, I want to talk about and ask you about the biggest mistakes or the biggest, what's the term that I'm looking for? Okay, we'll stay with mistakes. The biggest mistakes that people made or can make on their application that could lead to a refusal. So in your experience, what are some of the things that lead to a refusal of an application and that people should avoid doing?
Yeah, so we will probably go over some of the things we mentioned before, but
repetition is good. Repetition is good. It will stick in your mind. Okay.
So when we talked about proof of funds, making sure that probably on the document checklist, they will say how many months of bank statements you need. So sometimes it's 3 months or 4 months of bank statements. So make sure you have those.
Read carefully, right? It will tell you, we need 3 months of bank statements, not just one bank statement with, 2 weeks or something.
Yes.
Okay.
And dumping, meaning putting a large amount of money, let's say $10,000 or $20,000 in the bank, in your bank, does not count that showing proof of funds. That's why they ask 3 to 4 months, because they want to see that you have a consistent amount of money.
Okay.
You can also submit a savings account that maybe has, bigger lump sums, bigger, larger amounts. But that's one common mistake. So proof of funds, making sure all your documents make sense. We talked about translating.
So some people don't send translated documents.
And
okay,
it's
and that
sent
could
back
lead to a
them.
refusal.
Yes.
Okay.
Also, with your official documents, you want to make sure they're scanned properly. So now everything is online, so everything is being scanned. But sometimes people will send a picture of their passport and the corner is cut off.
I have seen this. Yeah.
So nothing can be cut off, or it shouldn't be cut off in your scan. So think about it as if you're the officer and you're looking through this application. So organization, if everything is in order, it will be easier for the officer to look through your application, maybe to approve your application. If things are cut off, they can't read the information. They don't know if those documents are legitimate or the official documents. So all of these things are very important.
It sounds like these are super basic things, right? But people make mistakes with basic things. And I think, like you said, immigration, it's a life-changing decision. So when you are doing these things, maybe you're anxious, maybe you're nervous, and maybe you say, okay, it's missing like half of the letter R at the end, but they will know what it is. Okay, it's fine. No, re-scan it, right? Like scan it again so you have the complete document.
Yeah, I would say it's not a rushed process. It's better to do it over again so that you submit the right and clear document. And two other main things I'll mention is we talked about ties to your country. So this is a common refusal, is not showing ties to your country. So you want to have those items we talked about before. So whether it is employment letter, whether you have children that are staying in the country, different ties like this that you're showing the officer that you will return to your country after your stay is finished in Canada. So that's very important. That's a very common reason for refusal. Okay. Another common reason for refusal is...
Oh, sorry, before you continue, showing the ties to your country. Before the video, you also mentioned another way to show ties to your country is that you have a travel history, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a passport and there's 0 times that you have traveled, you have never been able to show that you have left the country and come back, the visa office will be a little skeptical and say, wait, this is the person's first time traveling. We don't see any evidence in this case that they have a travel history.
Yeah,
there.
that was actually the other reason I was going to say is a common reason, but that's okay.
I'm going to disappear now.
No. That's another reason for refusal is not enough travel history. It's difficult if you have never traveled, then you may want to explore ways to maybe prepare your application in advance. But similar to what Alex said, not showing enough travel history or any travel history at all might be a concern. For an officer saying, well, if you have never traveled outside your country before and return, how do we know that you are going to do it again this time when you come to Canada? So that might be a longer conversation of how to prove travel history if you don't, but that is one of the common reasons for refusal.
And this is specifically important if you want to get like temporary residence, right? Like, I'm just going to work, I'm just going to school, I'm going to come back, I promise. And
your age might be a factor. Like, let's say you are 18 and you are applying as an international student to study in Canada for your bachelor's degree. Maybe travel history isn't as important because you're younger, right? It's obvious that you may not have as much travel history. But if you're older, this might be more important.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we have gone through a lot of information about the Canadian immigration process today. I hope you have gotten a lot of useful information. Before we finish, I just want to thank Jen again for coming in today. And I've learned a ton of stuff before recording this video, during the video, and again, I hope you have as well. So Jen, thank you very much for coming onto my channel. And where can people find your work and more about you? So this is your chance to tell people where they can learn more about you.
Yes, so I think a good starting point, I'm currently on Instagram and TikTok doing similar videos like this, some tips and tricks, things like that about immigration. So you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at MyImmigrationCA, and we'll put that into the description as well.
MyImmigrationCA.
Yes, so you can find videos there, and then from there, if you are ever looking for help, a consultation, legal representation, you can contact me through those two channels. And I think if there are any other questions, right, you can...
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for reminding me. I know there was a lot of information in this video. I'm sure a lot of you are going through the immigration process if you are watching this video. Maybe not a lot, but some of you. If you have specific questions related to Canadian immigration, please leave them in the comments. And depending on how this video does, if you enjoy this video, if you found it informative, we might do a follow-up video that answers specific questions that people have about the Canadian immigration process. So thank you for leaving your comments. Thank you for watching this video.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jen. It was a pleasure. And hopefully we'll see you in Canada very soon.
Yes.